is actually not crazy at all. She has a very normal reaction, expected reaction to having her son being killed. But she can't, like, she just doesn't know how to cope, and folks who look at her from the outside think that she looks not normal. But in reality, it's very reasonable, her reaction. So there are a lot of really powerful lines, and it's based on a true story of someone that Shakiri knows. And she brought the lines to the group, and the group learned the lines like pretty fast, and were performing it, and pretty soon you started seeing folks who had that similar experience stand up, and sometimes improvisationally and even in performance would say, okay, this is the part where, you know, this story comes up, and I'm just going to like take the space and I'm going to speak my story. And it was extremely powerful because, so I don't know what the audience thought, if they thought any of it was true or if they thought it was just a play, you know, fictional play. But it was so powerful. And then once one person did that, it started to cascade to other people. And it was so powerful to me because some of the time we didn't even necessarily know that a person had had this experience. And I just remember one time towards the end of the run, June, one of the performers, after, she would always, not always, but many times she would go up and say her story, and then she would weep, like on stage. And I was always so worried about her, you know, like, obviously we weren't forcing her to do it because she would just do it spontaneously sometimes, but I would always make sure that she was not traumatized. I mean, I think she was suffering trauma, but I wanted to take care of her in that process. And she would always cry. She'd walk off stage halfway, and then I'd go after her, and then she'd turn around and she'd walk back on stage, and she'd finish the whole show. And always after, we would talk to her, and she's like, no, I want to do this. And it happened in many cases where folks were dealing with hidden stories or traumatic stories, where they're like, when you speak with them afterwards, they're like, no, it's really important because I want people to hear my story. And yeah, so I feel like that being seen, or having folks bear witness to you, is something really powerful in terms of, you know, whose body gets the privilege of being on stage in a performance, and whose stories have the privilege of being represented on stage, is the big question.
Well, and I would add that it's incredibly profound for the audience who are on the other side as well. Like, it's one of our greatest tools to encourage empathy in people, to be able to witness the stories and narrative, as you were talking about, even to on a biological level. The experience of seeing and witnessing someone else's experience is encoded in your brain neurons. That's very similar to if you had actually experienced it. And so it's a great tool for us as we're trying to figure out how to bridge these really wide divides, that it's both the act of experiencing art, but then also witnessing it, which is personally what I believe is one of our greatest tools to figure out how we move ahead.
Yeah. Can I ask a question? So who were the audiences for this particular project?
For the Skywatcher.
It was kind of a mix. I mean, it was folks who just happened to want. This was in a public space on the street, on Ellis Street, right in front of the Tenderloin National Forest. So it was a mixture of folks who were just happening by, and a group friends of the residents, also the dance community.
Yeah, and then we did a flyer announcing specific times to do the performance.
Yeah.
So it was free outside?
It was free outdoors. It was produced by Dancers Group on site.
And did you have to use like microphones or?
Sometimes.
In a typical Skywatcher performance, it's sometimes yes, sometimes no. And I'd say, you know, you guys might have had a different kind of percentage, but I'd say a typical Skywatcher performance is about 85% resident people who live in the neighborhood. And for maybe the larger, sort of more advertised performances, we might go down to being like 75 to 80%, and but that 15 to 25% out from outside the neighborhood. And I think if I can, piggyback on that to me is also a way of art promoting social change, is this sheer juxtaposition of people and the closeness of that. One of the things I love about the forest is that there's like no choice about there being a division between audience and performer. You're about this close to someone who's singing their story, So when June is crying, you're not even that far away, really, and you're all in it together, and it's hard to tell who's what and where, and it's infectious, that thing that you were describing. I was going to say, can I keep talking for a minute? Or did you get your question?
I did.
Did it
Thank
answer?
you.
That I think that primal thing about for anyone who's a mom, see me, mommy, watch me. It's like there's something inherent in our DNA that wants to be seen, that just and we don't actually outgrow it from the mommy, watch me. But some people really don't get seen in a fundamental way, and I think that story is so profound that we're sort of doing a different story now in Skywatchers, but in a way it's the same story, because it's about what is it. What happens to the person whose story is not only not heard, but told it doesn't exist, and told it's not worth anything, and it doesn't matter. So your son was shot, let's move on. So many sons were shot for no reason, and and stop being upset, which makes you more upset, which then you can say, see, you're just a crazy person, which makes you, which then you have a choice. It goes in and it becomes toxic. It goes out and you prove everybody's point, you see. Anyway, I feel like that, we can't tell that story too many times, so we can't expose that truth too much right now. It's just that important. And I wanted to just sort of be beyond this part of art and social change, and if I can dip into my little academic pot for a second and say, I like to sort of think about the different ways that art promotes social change, because there's a huge spectrum, and I think we want to embrace that huge spectrum. So we're super involved in one aspect of that, which is community or socially, or whatever you want to call it, engaged practice, and there is what I think I spent the majority of my career doing, which was political art, which is just art with political content, which nothing wrong with it. It is just tends to happen in the theaters, and it has its own role, and it's a lot of what happens. It's not necessarily by or for the people, but it is of sometimes, and then I think about celebratory art, which I also think Skywatchers is part of that too. Or it's a celebration of life. It's a celebration of our collective humanity. It's a celebration of stories that are unheard, typically unheard. It's a celebration of cultures that have been suppressed, etc. And then there's interventionist, which I'd like to become really more skilled at right now. It hasn't been my forte, but I am welcome to anybody who wants to teach me. Which is, does the people kind of know what I mean when I say interventionist art? Pardon?
It's like what you were talking about.
Yes, totally. You can teach me more. It's like if people, of my era, the Guerrilla Girls. Remember the Guerrilla Girls?
Yeah.
Does anybody know who they were?
Yes, we do.
Yeah, who got famous. There were, women artists who were calling attention to the fact that women were not represented in any of the galleries and museums. which actually has changed not at all. Women and people of color. But they got famous, like altering billboards and stuff like that. That kind of intervention. So we're actively disrupting the normal flow of life. So anyway, I just wanted to sort of say those two, in the question of how does art promote social change, and there's so many ways, and I want to keep allowing, especially now, that whatever people's way is, whatever the thing is that you do or love to do, because I think it's a time when we're saying, I'm sorry, did it again, I need to do something else. But I think we need to say, what is it that I do already? What is it that I do? What is it that I'm already good at? How can I use what I do and who I am in service of this, disaster that's going on, or even just the small thing? How can I, use my interpreter skill in a way that makes social change? No one may ever see it outside of the small group. It's still social change. That value that the big billboard and the two human beings, it's all part of the ripple of social change.
Yep.
It's super important to value all that.
I am thinking about that in the field of art, we work with imagination. We work with envisioning the future. I mean, that's how we channel ourselves in through our community. And I think I just believe that many of the artists have envisioned different realities, and they are the ones that sometimes they guide us to what we need to do. So I do believe that we have the capacity to find the way in the black hole. One of the things that we have been working, when I started working in this initiative of live art in resistance, was that at ISAI, they are accustomed to work in this kind of political theater, very political, very pragmatic, you need to, the power to the people, fuck the police, all that stuff. And when we came in, we were a little bit more abstract. So one of the big confrontations between ISAI and us, Naka, was like, oh my God, how much you are going to navigate into those things. You don't want to be preaching to the preach the core, or how much buffer you have in order to explore a topic and just have time to breathe. And I think those are the things that I feel that I think for us it's very important to contemplate, how we need to navigate in this 5 line of saying social issues, focusing in ourselves in social issues, but at the same time being a little bit more experimental to present it, so people can. I think we have, art has the power to people really listen to you for some reason, listen to you, debrief, or have space, and I think those are the things that we need right now. Yeah. The only thing that also I want to mention that we are really interested in comedy right now. Comedy. We need to start laughing, maybe on or something shit. I think something that is very interesting for me, this absurdity that we are having, that there is so much potentiality for it to be funny, and it's say whatever we really want to.
Can I just quickly say something?
Yeah.
It was interesting because I was at a burlesque show not too long ago, and one of the performers was this really amazing, body positive, beautiful black woman, and she sang "No Scrubs," but she said she replaced the lyrics with "No Trump," and the lyrics were really cool. It was really cool. I don't know, the lyrics were cool because they referenced all the heavy stuff, the executive orders and the borders and all that stuff, and just and it actually provided so much solace, listening to that song and just being you know, like, yeah, like I think in ways like we process information through a series of a number of things. Like we know love through songs, we know a wide variety of things through many different mediums, whether it's a hug or a song or whatever. So being able to process these complex like circumstances in our world in different ways allows a trajectory of what to do next, because there's like these dimensions that you're looking at in a lot of ways. And another example was there's this really cool show in San Francisco about the idea of like the multiverse and like the infinity of like time, and they had all these different like kind of covers of Time magazine of like of who if the presidential election went one way or the other way, like it would be these like different covers, and it showed like, you know, if Trump was president or if, you know, Bernie or Hillary. And it was interesting to see that too, because it allows you to see, like I feel like art allows you to play around with the dimensions of reality, to understand, to poke at like which one of those like is actually the one we want to see, or how do we get to those places. I don't know, just
I was also just going to respond to something Jose said, which was, you know, don't preach to the choir, and I want to advocate for preaching to the choir, because I think it's actually important too. And I used to diminish my own work that way, by saying, you know, you're just preaching to the choir. But then I did a piece in 2001. It was like, you know, right after 9/11, and it just happened that I was doing a piece about Palestine and Israel, and there was a bunch of activists, you know, Women in Black and some others who are doing work around this issue, and who said, you know, it's super important for those of us who are on the streets all the time to be able to come in and be preached to. It's like, you know, because I was all like, yeah, but you're actually doing the stuff, you know, and she's like, yeah, but you're actually giving us inspiration to keep doing the stuff. And we're giving each other, we're giving each other the inspiration to keep going, and however we need to do it is important. So I'm just saying, you know, it's like folks in the TL telling their stories to other folks in the TL. You know, it's super important. Yeah.
Okay. Can I just also jump off of that? So in reference to East Side Arts Alliance, they're amazing. Like, they have so much incredible history and the kind of art that they make. I don't think we meant to criticize them at all, but just there was a sort of a meeting of different aesthetics that happened when we've been working there for maybe 10 years, 11 years, making work in their space. And I feel like that the value of it is that we do get challenged, and they also get challenged. And that was also the case when we worked with Skywatchers. I was really like worried somehow at the very beginning of the process, like, what if I can't get people to show up when the performance is supposed to happen? And what if, you know, they don't say the things that we expect them to say, or things like that. I was worried about so many things, and like went spinning off in my mind. And at the end of the process, I was like, I don't know what I was so worried about. Like, I had to let go. I had to, like, I should be able to practice this. This is the practice of making art for me, is like, you just jump into the unknown. You don't know what's going to happen. Something will happen, but you sort of have that faith that something will happen, and then you do it. And it was funny because, I mean, I feel like we have all these categories and these boxes and these histories that have been written for us, and we're all, you know, very knowledgeable about all of it. And what we really have to do is like break those things apart and use the unconscious, or use dreams, or use other process, imagination. That is the value of practicing art, you know, personally and in groups of people. It was funny that after we had finished making the piece and all the performances were done, our videographer is making a documentary about the process, and he interviewed Jose and myself, and he said, well, did any, you know, sometimes there was chaotic moments where we didn't sometimes many times there were chaotic moments where, you know, we like have a practice of improvisation, And sometimes we would get stressed out, and our videographer asked us in the interview, well, did any of the Skywatchers, did they have a problem with the process? And I was like, no, they had absolutely no. I just feel like they were such amazing improvisers. They weren't worried about the same things that I was worried about, so I don't know why I was so worried about it. But, no.
Well, there's such a huge, I mean, just to give you a little, there's such a huge surrender that has to happen, and we've been trained as artists in a very controlled situation, and you're jumping into a situation where it isn't just like, oh, there's a trauma here and there. The issue of poverty, of extreme poverty, is extremely traumatic on multiple levels. So you are dealing with variables you're not used to dealing with in an artistic situation, and it's part of the high of this particular program that if you think you have a little bit of Buddhist in you, you don't even know, right? And it's two things. Like one, that sort of act of faith and surrender to whatever is, but also what I hear under your words too, I think about a lot, which is, and you guys who've ever been in a class of mine know, but like tether yourself to what is most important. Know what it is you are tethered to. Like, why is it you get yourself up in the morning? Why is it that you make art? Why is it that you are living your life? Really, what is it? Is it the ancestors? Is it a divinity of some sort? Is it whatever it is? No, that's what you're tethered to, because the other stuff will suddenly fall away and not be as important. It feels like that's what has to happen there. That I think did. Like, oh yeah, that's not important, right? This is what's important.
Right.
Eye on the ball, kind of thing. There was also this, just quickie, like that whole abstract versus not versus protest art.
Political art.
Yeah. I was just wanting to give a prop to that, and the whole thing of getting part of, we are still artists, and just having the cause out there and making the thing, maybe that's expedient sometimes, but I think that also the thing that we're doing is learning to be eloquent. And the more eloquent we get to be in whatever the form is that we love and practice, the more effective we're going to be in the social change department. So I just wanted to.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to just piggyback on that, which is that we talk a lot about how artists traffic in metaphor and the abstract world, trafficking, and that there's also the role of being a bit of a translator or being a bit of a bridge builder from, many other people who are not artists operate from a very literal sense. And so one of the great gifts of artists is to be able to help build that bridge and maybe put up a bit of a mirror or a frame on whatever is going on in the world, but in a different way that adds to the perspective, as well as helps develop empathy so that we can move forward.
Mm-hmm. Oh no, I didn't.
No, you're good? Okay.
I just wanted to.
Well, I have some more questions here, but I'm curious to hear if there are any questions percolating in the audience. Yeah.
I have a question about, I don't know much about the Skywalker or Watchers group, but it sounds like it's an improvisational street performance group. Is that correct?